The morning I found the second phone, I wasn't even looking for it. I was folding laundry in our bedroom. The same bedroom where my husband Gerald Holt and I had slept side by side for 36 years. When a small prepaid flip phone slid out from between two folded undershirts and landed on the carpet without a sound. I stood there holding a clean pillowcase, staring down at it. And my first thought wasn't anger. It was something quieter and sadder than that. It was recognition. The way you recognize a smell from childhood that you hadn't thought about in decades. Something inside me already knew what this was, even before I picked it up. Gerald was downstairs watching the game. I could hear the television through the floor, the low murmur of a crowd, the occasional commentary. Our house in Savannah had always carried sound that way. Thin floors, old walls, 36 years of ordinary noise, moving through the rooms like weather. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed with the phone in my lap. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there for a long moment, thinking about the kind of woman I had been for most of my adult life. Careful, accommodating. The kind of woman who ironed her husband's shirts without being asked and kept the pantry stocked, and smiled at church, like everything was fine even when it wasn't. The kind of woman who, when something felt wrong, told herself she was probably imagining things. Then I opened the phone. There were 11 text messages from a contact saved only as a letter. One letter, T. I read every single one. By the time I set the phone back on the nightstand, something inside me had shifted permanently. Not broken, not shattered the way people describe in movies, just shifted. The way a door settles wrong in its frame after a storm, still standing. But nothing fits quite the same anymore. I went back downstairs and sat beside Gerald on the couch and watched the last 20 minutes of the game, as if my entire understanding of our marriage hadn't just rearranged itself completely. That was the night I decided I needed to find out exactly who T was, and more importantly, exactly what my husband had been hiding from me. Before I explain what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself sitting next to someone you've loved for decades, and realized you have no idea who they actually are anymore? If you have, leave me a comment. I read every single one. And if you're watching tonight, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Gerald Holt was not what anyone would call a flashy man. He drove a modest truck, wore the same brand of boots for 15 years, and could spend an entire Saturday afternoon replacing a fence post without complaint. When we were young, I loved that steadiness. It felt like something you could build a life around. We met through his cousin at a 4th of July picnic outside of Macon, Georgia in 1987. Gerald was 28, broad-shouldered, quiet in a way I mistook for depth. He asked me once what I wanted out of life, and actually listened to the answer. That was rare enough at 26 that I held on to it. We married 9 months later, moved to Savannah for his work. Gerald ran the operations side of a regional trucking company owned by his uncle. Good, steady work, respectable. I worked part-time at a dental clinic for the first several years, until our daughter Felicity was born, and then Gerald sat me down one evening and suggested, gently and reasonably, that it probably made more sense for me to be home full-time. The commute, the childcare costs, the wear on the car. He laid it out like a budget sheet. And because he was calm, and because it sounded logical, and because I loved our daughter more than my paycheck, I agreed. I didn't go back to work after that. Not full-time, not part-time, not really at all. Gerald handled the money. He always had, even before I stopped working. He paid the bills, managed the savings, filed our taxes. If I asked questions, he answered them quickly, and in enough detail to make me feel satisfied without actually telling me very much. "We're in good shape," he'd say. "We're being smart." And I believed him, the way you believe someone you've chosen to trust. What I didn't understand then was the difference between trust and dependency. Gerald had spent years blurring that line so carefully, I never noticed the boundary disappearing. The second phone changed things. In the days after I found it, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Gerald's patterns, which I'd long since stopped consciously tracking, suddenly became visible again. The way he always took his personal cell phone into the garage when he went out to check on the car. The way he angled his laptop screen slightly away when I walked through the kitchen. Small things, individually meaningless. Together, they added up to something I didn't have a name for yet. About 2 weeks after finding the phone, our daughter Felicity called on a Wednesday afternoon in tears. Her husband, a man named Boyd Sutton, had moved out without warning, left a note on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker, and taken his truck and most of the savings from their joint account. Felicity found out at the ATM when her card declined. I held the phone so hard my knuckles ached while she talked. She was 33 years old, working part-time at a preschool, raising our 7-year-old grandson Oliver alone now, and she needed help. Not a fortune. Just enough to cover rent while she figured things out. Maybe $3,000. That evening I sat beside Gerald at the dinner table and watched him eat his pot roast while I told him about Felicity. He set his fork down carefully. $3,000 isn't a small amount, he said. She's our daughter, I said. He looked at me with an expression I had seen before, patient, reasonable, the expression that said I was thinking emotionally, and he was thinking clearly. She made her choices with Boyd. I can't undo those. Boyd left, Gerald. She didn't. He picked his fork back up. We'll talk about it. We never talked about it. 3 days later, Felicity called again to tell me Boyd had also canceled their health insurance. Oliver had a dentist appointment coming up that she couldn't reschedule or pay for without coverage. She sounded exhausted in a way that went past tired, the way only single mothers sound at the end of long weeks, with no relief coming. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I went to the closet where I kept a small wooden box on the top shelf behind Gerald's old camping gear. For almost 20 years, I had been setting aside small amounts. Birthday money from my mother before she passed, a little cash back from grocery runs, a Christmas check from my aunt. Nothing dramatic. A kind of private savings I never fully admitted to myself was protective rather than just cautious. There was $412 in that box. I took it all and wired it to Felicity that afternoon. It wasn't enough, but it was everything I had that was actually mine. That night, Gerald asked what I'd done about Felicity. I told her we'd look into it, I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. He nodded and went back to his program. Sitting across from him that evening, watching him so easily move past our daughter's crisis, I felt something shift inside me again. Not the quiet resignation I had grown used to over the years. Something harder. Anger is too simple a word for it. It was more like clarity, arriving late, blinking in the light, surprised by how long it had been kept in the dark. The following Saturday, Gerald left early for a fishing weekend with 2 friends from church. He kissed my cheek at the door and told me he'd call when they arrived at the lake house. He was barely out of the neighborhood before I was in his study. I had been in that room thousands of times over the years. Dusted the shelves, replaced the printer paper, dropped off coffee without being asked. Gerald's space was always organized with a precision that felt less like neatness and more like control. Labeled folders, locked drawers. A filing cabinet in the corner I had assumed for years contained only work documents and tax records. The filing cabinet was locked. The middle desk drawer was locked. The small floor safe I had noticed once years ago and forgotten about. That was locked too. But Gerald kept spare keys in a small ceramic bowl on the bookshelf because he was the kind of man who was confident enough in his authority that he never imagined his wife would look. The filing cabinet contained exactly what I expected at first. Insurance documents, vehicle registration, business correspondence from the trucking company, now sold after Gerald's uncle passed, though Gerald had stayed on as a consultant. And then, behind the business folder, a second folder with no label. Inside were bank statements I had never seen, account numbers I didn't recognize, a savings balance that made me grip the edge of the desk to stay steady. My husband had told me for 30 years we needed to be careful with money. He had said no to a kitchen renovation we needed badly. Said no to replacing my car for 2 years after the transmission started failing. Said no to helping Felicity with her college loans because we simply couldn't afford it. There was enough money as to sit in accounts to have paid for all of it. Twice over. I stood in that study for a long time. Then I kept looking. The safe was the size of a shoebox. Digital keypad. I had no idea what the combination was, and I told myself that was fine. I had already found more than enough, but something made me hesitate in front of it anyway. I thought about Gerald's patterns, the things he cared about. The dates he remembered. Our anniversary, our children's birthdays, the day the trucking company was founded. On instinct, I tried his mother's birthday. Margaret Holt. September 3rd, 1931. Zoo 931. The safe clicked open. Inside was cash. Not pocket money. Stacked bills. Organized. With the care of someone who had been building something intentionally over a long period of time. Underneath the cash were more documents. Property records. A deed for a rental property in Augusta I had never heard of. Investment accounts. A life insurance policy. I looked at the beneficiary line. It wasn't my name. The name was Teresa Lamb. I sat back on my heels on the study floor and breathed through it for a moment, the way you breathe through physical pain. Slow and deliberate, because if you rush it, you lose control entirely. Teresa. I closed the safe exactly as I found it. Put every document back. Locked the filing cabinet. Replaced the keys in the ceramic bowl. Then I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window and watched the afternoon light move across the garden I had planted and maintained by myself for 15 years. By the time the tea cooled, I knew 3 things. I needed a lawyer, I needed copies of everything I had just seen, and I needed to do both of those things before Gerald came home Sunday evening. I had never looked for a divorce attorney before. The words felt strange, even typed into my phone browser. Family law attorney, Savannah, Georgia. But I found one. A woman named Patricia Odom, whose office website described her as a specialist in asset protection and high-conflict divorce. 30 years of practice. The phrase hidden assets appeared twice in her homepage. I called Monday morning. The office smelled like bergamot and old paper. Patricia Odom herself was compact, precise, somewhere in her 60s, with silver hair cut close, and reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain. She shook my hand with the kind of grip that told you immediately she was not going to waste your time or hers. She read the photographs I had taken of Gerald's documents without a word for nearly 5 minutes. Then she set her reading glasses down and looked at me directly. How long have you been married? 36 years. And you had no access to these accounts? None. Did he ever explain where the family money went? He said we were careful. I said it quietly. He always said we needed to be careful. Patricia. Odom nodded once, slowly. What you've brought me today suggests your husband has been systematically concealing marital assets for a significant number of years. The word systematically landed differently than I expected. Not chaotic, not impulsive, systematic, planned. Is it possible he was having an affair? I asked. Patricia paused before answering. Do you want me to tell you what the documents suggest, or what your marriage might mean? Both. She folded her hands carefully. The financial structure here is our primary legal concern. Whatever the personal relationship with the named beneficiary involves, the property, the accounts, the life insurance designation. These represent deliberate concealment of what the law considers marital property. She walked me through what that meant practically. She told me what I should continue documenting and what I should not touch. She told me not to confront Gerald yet, which surprised me. Why not? Because the moment a person who has been hiding assets understands that they move money. Often faster than the courts can freeze it. I stared at her across the desk. Open a private account today, she said. In your name only. Somewhere he doesn't bank. The idea should have felt ordinary. It felt like something quietly revolutionary. Before I left, Patricia Odom asked me one more question. Are you afraid? Yes. Of what exactly? I thought about it honestly. Starting over at 63. With nothing I actually earned. Starting from zero, at an age when most people are thinking about winding down, not rebuilding. Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Then she said carefully, You're not starting from zero, you're starting from the truth. Those are different things entirely. I drove home through Savannah's evening traffic, thinking about that sentence the whole way. Gerald noticed something changed about me in the weeks that followed, I could tell. He watched me sometimes at dinner in a way he hadn't in years. Not tenderness. Surveillance. He had always been good at reading the atmosphere in a room. It was part of how he maintained control. Catching subtle changes. Before they became problems he couldn't manage. I became very deliberate about giving him nothing to read. I made dinner and asked about his week, and listened when he talked about the consulting work, and commented on the weather and the neighbors and Felicity's situation, the same way I always had. Calm, pleasant, contained. The wife he expected. Meanwhile, every Sunday afternoon while Gerald watched the game, I photographed documents. I organized everything into a private cloud account Patricia had advised me to create. I opened a checking account at a bank across town. I started learning, quietly and alone, what our financial life actually looked like. It was worse than I had known from the filing cabinet alone. The rental property in Augusta had been purchased 11 years earlier. Gerald told me that year we couldn't afford to replace our roof. I remembered specifically because we'd argued about it. One of the few times I pushed back hard enough for it to count as an argument, and Gerald had laid out numbers at the kitchen table, so patiently, so thoroughly, that I walked away feeling embarrassed for having asked. He bought a rental property that same year. There was also a second property, a small cabin outside of Hilton Head. The deed was in Gerald's name and Teresa Lamb's name jointly. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I drove to Hilton Head. I told myself it was foolish. I told myself it was reckless and emotional, and exactly the kind of thing Patricia would have told me not to do. But after weeks of documents and photographs and legal language, I needed the reality of it. I needed Teresa Lamb to be a real person instead of 2 words on a property deed. The cabin sat at the end of a short lane flanked by live oaks. It was small, well kept, with a porch swing and window boxes full of something purple. I parked across the road and sat there for several minutes. Then a woman came out the front door carrying a basket of laundry. She was perhaps 60, gray blonde hair pulled back simply. Gardening clothes. She moved to a small clothesline at the side of the house without hurrying, and began hanging things up one at a time with the ease of someone in a place that belonged to them. I got out of the car. She heard my door and turned, and when she saw me walking toward her, something moved across her face that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite surprise. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for something they hoped wouldn't come. "Are you Teresa Lamb?" She held a pillowcase against her chest. "Yes, I'm Beverly Holt, Gerald's wife." The color didn't drain from her face. It was more like it settled, like she had been braced for this. "I know who you are," she said quietly. We stood there looking at each other across a few feet of gravel. "You'd better come inside," she said. The kitchen was small and clean, and smelled like coffee, and the same bergamot I had associated with Patricia Odom's office, which struck me as the kind of meaningless coincidence that your mind clings to when everything real is too much to hold. Teresa Lamb sat across from me at her kitchen table, and I saw, up close, that she looked less like a woman who had been living well on someone else's money, and more like a woman who was tired in a specific bone-deep way I recognized. "How long?" I asked. I didn't specify what I was asking about because I didn't need to. She looked at her coffee cup. "Gerald and I were involved for about 4 years, a long time ago. Almost 15 years back, so it ended." She nodded slowly. "He ended it, but by then I had already signed paperwork for him. Property documents, business structures. He said it was for tax purposes. I was a bookkeeper for 20 years. I should have known better. He used your name." She looked at me directly. I let him, because I trusted him, and then because I was already in it too deep to know how to get out cleanly. And then because he made me feel like I owed him something. She paused. "He's very good at making people feel that way." The chill that moved through me then wasn't anger. It was recognition. "Is the cabin jointly owned?" I asked. "Technically," she said. "But I've never touched his money. I have my own. This place was my mother's. I inherited it. Gerald's name got added to a document I shouldn't have signed, and I've spent years trying to figure out how to undo it without making things worse." She opened a kitchen drawer and took out a folder. Then she slid it across the table, she said. "I've been keeping records," she said, "in case I ever needed them. I think you need them more than I do now." I opened the folder. It held copies of documents I recognized from Gerald's safe and many I hadn't seen before. Account records, business filings, a timeline in Teresa's careful bookkeeper handwriting going back over a decade. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because he shouldn't get away with it." Her voice was quiet but completely steady, and because I should have come forward a long time ago and I didn't. This is me trying to do the right thing late. Better late than not at all. I looked at the woman across the table from me. Another person Gerald had shaped to his convenience, and then arranged around himself like furniture. We were different in almost every way. And in the way that mattered most, we were exactly the same. I thanked her. She nodded once. I drove back to Savannah with Teresa's folder on the passenger seat, and the windows down, and the coastal air moving through the car. And somewhere on the highway I started crying. Not because I was devastated, because I was finally completely certain. No more waiting to be sure. No more giving him the benefit of the doubt. No more making myself smaller so Gerald Holt could feel larger. I met with Patricia Odom again 2 days later and gave her everything. She spread the documents across her conference table and went through them with the systematic calm of someone who had seen versions of this story before, but never stopped taking it seriously. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Beverly, your husband has been managing a financial exit from this marriage for over a decade. I know. What he built is significant. But so is what we can document." She looked at me carefully. "Are you ready?" I thought about Felicity crying over a declined card at the ATM. I thought about the $412 in my Walden's box. I thought about the navy dress I didn't buy myself 15 years ago because Gerald called it impractical, and the vacation we never took. And every time I colored my own hair to save money while my husband owned a cabin in Hilton Head. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The papers were filed on a Thursday morning in October. Golden, cool, the kind of Savannah October that makes you understand why people choose to stay in a place for a lifetime. Gerald was served at home. I had arranged to be at Felicity's apartment when it happened, sitting on her small couch helping Oliver with a puzzle because I wanted the first moments after to be with the people I loved rather than the person I was leaving. My phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times. Then he called Felicity's cell phone. She looked at the screen, then at me and said simply, "Do you want me to answer?" "No," I said, "not yet." Oliver looked up from the puzzle. "Is Grandpa mad?" "Grandpa has some things to figure out," I told him. He considered this with the calm logic of a 7-year-old. "Okay," he said, and went back to the puzzle. Gerald and I spoke for the first time 4 days later. He had retained an attorney of his own, a man named Stephen Bray, and Patricia had advised me that a direct conversation was acceptable, now that things were formally in motion. Gerald called on a Sunday evening. I sat in my kitchen with a glass of water and answered. He was controlled. That was the first thing I noticed, not the panic I had imagined, not the remorse. He sounded like a man who had prepared for this conversation carefully. "I know you found things," he said. "Yes." Silence, then. "You don't understand the full context. I understand what I read. I understand whose name was on your life insurance policy." "Beverly, that is not what it looks like." "I know Teresa Lamb, Gerald. I visited her." A long silence this time. She had no right. She had every right. I said it quietly, not angrily. "She also gave me documents you're going to have a hard time explaining." He exhaled slowly. "There are things I was building for us. Protections. Protections for who? For our future. Our future didn't include me knowing about it." I let that land for a moment. "You told me to be careful for 36 years. You told me we couldn't afford things. You watched Felicity struggle and you didn't help her. And the whole time, Gerald." "I know," he said finally. So quiet, I almost didn't hear it. "I know." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing else to say that the documents hadn't already said better. The mediation process took most of the winter. Gerald's attorney tried several angles. The business structures were for liability protection. The accounts were intended as joint assets eventually. The property in Augusta was an investment meant to benefit us both. Patricia dismantled each argument with patient, thorough documentation, and Teresa Lamb submitted a written statement that the opposing counsel clearly hadn't anticipated. By March, we had an agreement. It was fair. I had not expected fair. I had expected a fight that would cost more than I could survive emotionally. And instead I got something close to what the law said I was owed from the life I had actually lived. Patricia said it was one of the cleaner resolutions she had seen in a complicated case. I think Gerald was tired. I think somewhere underneath the strategy, he knew what he had done. And I think being confronted by 2 women who both had documentation was more than he had planned for. The day the settlement was signed, Patricia shook my hand and held it for a moment. "You did well," she said. "I thought of all the years I spent, believing I wasn't capable of managing money, making decisions, understanding finances. All the years I accepted Gerald's calm certainty that he knew better. All the years I made myself smaller, more careful, more dependent. Because he said that was the wise and loving thing to do. I think I did this 30 years later than I should have, I said. Patricia smiled slightly. You did it when you were ready. That's when it counts. I live now in a small house in the Ardsley Park neighborhood of Savannah. 2 bedrooms, warm yellow walls, a back porch where I drink my coffee every morning without anyone telling me I've made it too strong. I planted jasmine along the fence in March, and it's already starting to climb. Felicity lives 12 minutes away. Oliver comes over on Saturdays and we make pancakes in shapes that are supposed to be dinosaurs, but mostly look like misshapen clouds, and he accepts this without complaint, which is one of the great dignities of children. Last month, Felicity started a night class at the community college. She looked nervous when she told me. I told her she was going to be fine. She believed me, which meant more than she probably knew. Gerald calls occasionally. I don't answer most of the time. The conversations that do happen are brief and polite, and feel like talking to someone you once knew well in a context that no longer exists. I don't hate him. I spent a long time deciding whether that was weakness or wisdom, and I've landed on thinking it's simply the truth. What he did was wrong. It was systematic and deliberate, and it cost me years I cannot get back. And I can hold that true at the same time that I hold 36 years of ordinary life that wasn't all deception. People are capable of both. That doesn't excuse the harm. It just makes the grief more complicated. I've started keeping a journal. Small things. What the garden looks like in the morning. What Oliver said this week. What I'm learning about the person I am when no one is managing me. I don't know if I'll ever share it with anyone, but there is something clarifying about writing down your own life in your own words, as though for the first time it actually belongs to you. What I know now that I didn't know at 26, or 40, or even 60 is this. Love is not the same thing as smallness. Real love does not require you to become less so someone else can feel like more. And if you find yourself at any age waking up to the realization that the life around you was built on terms you were never actually consulted about, it is not too late. It is never too late to read the paperwork, to ask the questions, to open the safe, whatever shape that safe takes in your own life. The morning I found the second phone, I thought I was discovering an ending. I was wrong. I was discovering the first moment I finally started paying attention, and everything that came after. The documents, the drive to Hilton Head, the lawyer's office, the signed papers, the yellow walls, the jasmine climbing the fence. All of that came from that one moment when I stopped explaining away the evidence and started trusting what I already knew. That is something no one can take from you once you find it.